work that into my talk, but I'm just going to say it. So I met that song when I was at Lake Austin Spa. And I lived in Texas. And I went to the spa there, and it was awesome. And I thought, well, this is like some years ago. And I saw on the schedule this thing called Nia Dance. And I have to tell you that I was raised Southern Baptist. So dancing doesn't happen. You just don't. You can march maybe, but dancing's not in the universe of things that you're allowed to do as a Baptist. So anyway, I saw this thing called Nia, and it was in the Tai Chi room, and I thought, well, I'll just go see what it is. And so I'm walking in my little shorts and my little sneakers and T-shirt and looking really dorky because that's, yeah. And that song was playing. And I thought, and the wall of mirrors, of course, just in case you're not intimidated enough. I'm standing there going, I think this was a mistake. But there's a song, if I were brave, what would I try? I thought, well, I'll stand in the back. And then all these girls came in their little cute jazzercise outfits, and it was awful. But anyway, that's my story that goes with that song. So thank you for being here today and letting me have flashbacks of this time. I was brave enough to last. I never went back, but I was brave enough to last through one episode of Nia Dance. And everybody's got a story like that, right? And we can find gratitude even for those things. If we look, if we take the time to go, oh, there is some good in this somewhere. I wonder where it is. I'd love to see it. And so that's a good introduction to this month, Gratitude 360. Can I see gratitude in all these things going on in my world, some of which look darn ugly? Because we know that's the world we're in, right? Some stuff looks really like out of whack and not like we want it to see. And yet, can we find gratitude for each and all of those things? Sometimes the answer is not right now. It's going to take me a while until I can have enough space in my, from rear view mirror, and I can look back and say, well, that was useful. So I can be grateful for that because it was useful. It reminded me that, movement is not necessarily my strong suit, at least not that kind of movement. So yesterday, when I was working on my daily gratitudes for part of a writing practice that I'm doing with a writers group, there's a daily gratitude and something, generosity, I think, practice. And you write down stuff. And I found myself writing, the things I'm grateful for were the irritants that emphasize what's bugging me, people who show me that, and then the people that show me a way out or through. And I thought, I didn't know I was grateful for that. Okay, let's work on that idea. Can I be grateful for the irritants? Yeah, I can. Sometimes we have to dig to find that kernel of gratitude for hard things. And that's a useful experience for us because the world doesn't act like we want it to. Anybody notice that? And then I remembered today's talk title, which I set up 6 weeks ago or so, and it's called MindShift, Refocusing Expectations to Appreciation. Oh, yeah, well, there is that. Because we have expectations. We have perceptions. We have this notion of how we think it ought to be working, right? I'm not the only one, right? How often in your life do your expectations actually play out the way you want them to. Do they ever? Occasionally, sometimes, rarely, maybe. Even if your expectation is something simple, like sleeping through the night, or remembering how a song goes, for somebody who can sing. We have expectations. It's kind of how we're wired. And yet, how often do they deliver those goods? So what would it take to shift from having this perception of how the world ought to work to being able to find a place of living in appreciation for the way it does work? That's the question for today. How do we move from that my way or the highway place to, well, I can be grateful for that. I can find good in that. And if you happen to know an Eeyore in your world, or maybe even be one sometimes, does being in that disappointed place serve you? Well, it keeps me safe, right? If I'm always disappointed, then I can't be disappointed. Oh, wait. It does make your boundaries, your castle wall and your moat protective, because you're starting in a place of being disappointed, so nobody can disappoint you. You can do that. It's allowed. Does it really serve you, though? Does it serve your creative potential? Does it serve your highest and best expression of yourself to be shielded that much? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what your experience is and what your experience that you desire is. So I went and looked up the word expectation in the dictionary because I thought I knew what it meant, but I thought I'd better check just in case I had twisted it in my mind somehow. And actually, the word expectation just means looking forward to something. That's all. It isn't tightly boundaried. It isn't limited. It isn't restrictive. It isn't narrowly defined. It's actually pretty huge. It's looking forward to something. And in common usage, that's not how we do it. It's not how we use that word. It's not how we package it in our minds. And I remember a whole host of years ago, back when I still lived in Cleveland, and I did winter, because I don't do winter anymore. And I was working in Cleveland, and it was winter. It was Christmas time. And I was working, and it was snowing. It was a blizzard, actually. And I left my apartment, and I went to work all day, and I drove to the airport after work to catch a plane to go to see my mom in Florida for Christmas. And my mom, bless her heart, said, "Your hem is crooked, you need a haircut, and your shoes are scuffed." And I thought, God, Mom, it's great to see you too. And I thought, what on earth are her expectations about? And it took me a while to figure out what her expectations were about, because she was afraid for me that I would be scared and lonely and isolated and by myself because no one would love me, because I didn't know how to look tidy. Because in her world, that's the only thing that mattered. She was about looking proper because that's all she knew. And I don't give a rip. Well, I do. I don't like being naked in public, or dancing on stage. But really, that was her boundary. That was her box. And so her view, her perception was, if you want to be loved, you have to fit the box. And it's important to be loved because otherwise you're going to be lonely and you won't have anybody to look after you when you're old. Okay, Mom. Good going. I'm glad it works for you. And it did for her whole life. That's how she lived. And that's how that group of people moved through the world. Fortunately, that's not the truth or the answer or the only way. So we sometimes can get really specific in our expectations. It's got to be just so. What's that about? What is just so about? I have an idea. I think it's about we are trying to control the outcomes of our world. The big word is control, because we need it to look exactly a certain way, otherwise we don't feel safe. What if we can expand our point of view to recognize we're safe already, to recognize we're secure already, to recognize that the world works for us and for our benefit, and our need for everything to be precisely just so is an imaginary story we made up. That's my question for today. What does it take for us to expand our reality big enough to recognize that no matter what, we are already fine and dandy? No matter what's going on in the world of form in front of our eyes, no matter what the people on the TV set are doing or the radio are doing or the videos are doing or whatever, no matter what, we are fine. Our life is good. Things are in divine order. Even if it doesn't necessarily look like it, if we look through our logical minds and we get into that space of, yeah, but it should look a certain way. Like, take a step back, adjust the perspective. What if this really is okay? Takes some work, doesn't it? Because we're not staring at a world that looks like it works like it's supposed to. At all, sometimes. So I was reading a little book this week earlier called Anything You Want that was written by an entrepreneur by the name of Derek Sivers. You may know of him. He's the guy who invented CD Baby back in 1997 because he was an independent artist and he wanted to sell his CDs online. This predates PayPal, so that kind of gives you a frame of reference how long ago it was. But he wanted to sell his CDs, and there wasn't any way to do it. So he sat down with how to write code for dummies and figured out how to write code for a website to sell his CD. And he figured it out. He's a smart guy, right? And then his friends came and they said, "Oh, cool, can you put ours up there too?" And then he said, "Sure. No biggie. I figured it out. It's easy." And then friends of friends, and then friends of friends, and friends and friends and friends. And suddenly, he went from being a musician that sold his CD to a guy who has created an empire of independent music artists selling their CDs online. And it created this massive business. And he didn't even recognize it as a business because his intention, his focus, was to help himself and his friends do this thing they wanted to do. And he got a call one day from a guy saying, "So what other live new new releases do you have?" And he's going, "Well, what do you mean? New releases? Well, you're a store, aren't you?" I guess. because that wasn't part of his picture of the world. And because he wasn't thinking of his website to sell CDs as a business, he wasn't thinking of it as a store, he didn't get all twisted up expecting a certain outcome. And in this little book, he wrote about his business model, if you want to call it that. It included making dreams come true for others and myself. Making a company that's a great way to improve the world while improving myself. Not pursuing business just for my own gain. Only answering calls for help. And persistently improving and inventing. That was it. That was his business model. Right? It wasn't about making an industry. It wasn't about making a production. It was about helping people and doing something useful. And that was it. That was his model. And it worked. And he did this, and people kept saying, "Can I buy your business?" And he said, "It's not for sale. No, I'm doing this because I want to." Until it quit being fun. And when it quit being fun, somebody called and said, "Hey, can we buy your business?" He said, "Maybe." "Yeah, you can buy my business because I'm not living my dream anymore. It quit serving me." That shift from needing a certain outcome to being present and active and participative in our life experience, working towards some goal that serves us, is our choice. And we have to be present in our experience in order to see it, to recognize it, to name it. So on page 268 of the Science of Mind text, Dr. Ernest Holmes wrote, and the first part of this probably will be familiar to a lot of you, "The law is a law of liberty, but not of license. It is exact and exacting, and unless we are willing to comply with its nature and work with it, along the lines of its inherent being, we shall receive no great benefit." What is he saying? We need to step up and imagine and then embody the good that we wish to see. It's that simple and that complicated. We need to see, imagine, and then step into the good we wish to claim. On the previous page, 267, he wrote, "We attract to ourselves that which is like our thought. Each one must become more if they wish to draw a greater good into their life." That's pretty obvious. We're instructed not to look outside ourselves, expecting to receive our good from out there. We align with that good, and then it has to show up. That's the rule. We didn't make up the rule. That is the rule. We align with our good, and it must show up. Think about Eeyore. What good is Eeyore claiming? The good of castle walls and moats. I'm safe behind these walls, and you can't touch me because you can't get to me. I won't let it. What good are you claiming? And then back to Dr. Holmes. In the middle of page 268, this is a little sentence that's capitalized in the text, and I always think he's yelling. "Everyone must pay the price for that which they receive, and that price," this is important, "is paid in mental and spiritual coin." Nothing is free, everything costs, but this costs thought and intention. What you want, what you wish to create, what you wish to experience, that's where it comes from. It's not out there. It's not setting up the world to act like you want it. It's internalized, deciding, becoming, creating, experiencing. And then it was the next paragraph, and I know I've only read this at least a dozen times, but it caught my eye yesterday. All nature conspires to produce and manifest the freedom of the individual, that it may unloose its own energy. We may be sure that God is for us, whatever our conception of God may be. This thing must act in accordance with divine law of the universe, and this law says that whenever and wherever there is an adequate subjective energy, which is to say the image we focus on with our intention and attention, this image will not only tend to take form, but it will take form and it will manifest. Got it? We dream it, we're clear, we get rid of all the arguments and all the yabbits and all the it can't possibly be because. We nuke those things, and it must happen. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff about the will of God, you know. And if you're fundamentalist like me, you may think this means we settle for less than we want, because that's what we were taught, because God wills it. But that's actually not what he's saying. On the bottom of 268 and the top of 269, he says, the will of God is always good. It is a principle of life. It is to be life. The will of God is beauty, truth, and harmony. It expresses life without hurt. Anything that will enable us to express a greater life, greater happiness, greater power must be the will of God for us. There is nothing in the will of God that says you can't. So any story in your head that says, I am not allowed to enjoy myself because the will of God says I have to be a good girl, you might want to take that out back. I don't care what you do with it out back. So what I've been trying to struggling to figure out a way to say is our expectations about how it ought to be are just too small and limited. That's not the rules of the game we're in. We would all be better served if we can open our perception and allow the fullness of this divine experience of life, of God, of truth, of beauty as us to flow through us, to flow to us, to be our present reality. And the best way we can do this is to see, notice, focus on, imagine, and appreciate the good that's in our lives right now, and to claim it. So then the obvious question, so what's good? Yes, that looks like a trick question. Is it a trick question? Emerson told us, cultivate the habit of being grateful for every good thing that comes to you, and to give thanks continuously. And because all things have contributed to your advancement, you should include all things in your gratitude. All things. And then 2 quotes from Stoic philosopher Epictetus. Don't seek for everything to happen as you would wish it would, but rather wish that everything happens as it will. Then your life will flow well. Do you have alarm bells going off in your head when I say that? You might. He's suggesting we find gratitude for the hard stuff too. Fortunately, in the next quote, he gives us clues about how to manage that. It is easy to praise providence for anything that may happen if you have 2 qualities: a complete view of what is actually happening in any instance, and a sense of gratitude. Without gratitude, what's the point of seeing? And without seeing, what's the object of gratitude? So do we ever have a full picture of what's going on when we're in the middle of it? Not ever. Maybe sometimes, but really, really rarely. It's not even reasonable to expect that to be going on. It's like when you're in the middle of yuck, it's going to be yucky. And it's only when we can step back and see the larger picture that we can see that beneficial activity that happens as part of that. And it isn't actually useful for us to pretend that an experience is good when it doesn't feel good. That's dishonest. And it's not truthful. And it's not beneficial because we're lying to ourselves then. If an experience feels yucky, it feels yucky. And that's not the truth of it. It's the experience of the moment, but it's not the truth of it, and it's not the truth of the whole story. It's this moment that feels yucky. If we can remember that the situation, the experience, is impermanent, that generally helps make it feel not quite so catastrophic. So, most of us have done gratitude practices forever. And on one level, we're bored with them. To be honest, we're bored with them. Or we don't feel inspired or uplifted when we do them. What's the real function of a gratitude practice? Anybody want to take a guess? Shifting mind. What else? Open heart. What else? Reminder of infinite abundance. What else? Finding peace. Freedom. Joy. I didn't get the answer I expected. Cool. The answer I was looking for was it helps us pay attention. The act of making yourself sit down or stand up, it doesn't really matter, and write down, here's what I'm grateful for, makes us pay attention, makes us be focused on what it was that happened. When I was writing yesterday, I'm grateful for the irritants in my life. Really? Okay. Because it makes us pay attention to our life. It makes us be in our life, not in our heads. Makes us be present in our reality. So, author and teacher Margaret Wheatley wrote, "Without reflection, we go blindly on our way, creating more unintended consequences and failing to achieve anything useful. It's amazing to me how much we do, but how little time we spend reflecting on what we just did." Gratitude practices, noticing what we're grateful for, even if they're hard or irritating or annoying or, pick your word, they wake us up and they give us perspective on our life experience and they keep us on our bearings and keep us paying attention to how the world seems and how we imagine it, and keep us conscious of the world we would prefer to see and what we need to shift in our own minds to see this new world. So we presently have 2 opportunities for practice. One on Tuesdays with Sharon that started last week for 3 minutes of spilling your gut about all the stuff you're grateful for. And you take turns so that everybody gets a chance to feel filled up by gratitude. It's a juicy feeling. And then the other one tomorrow night with me is more about tools to remember and use and oh yeah, I could be grateful for that. I could do it that way. It's about giving yourself tools you can pull out of your toolbox and put on, try out. Now, tomorrow night we've got a complication because Janet's doing the Full Moon Labyrinth walk at 7 o'clock. And it's really hard to be online at 5 to 6:30 and then go walk the labyrinth at 7 unless you happen to live in the center of town. in which case you can do both. But if you can't do both because you need to go walk the labyrinth, that's cool. I'm sure that Janet will be doing gratitude practices there too. It's important. You can always join next week. All the links are in the newsletter. Having a regular gratitude practice is important because it gives our busy brain something to do that's beneficial and supportive for us to focus on. So I'm going to close with a poem from 13th century Persian poet Rumi, one that I've not said before, I don't think. If a fir tree had a foot or two, like a turtle or a wing, do you think it would just wait for the saw to enter? You know the sun journeys all night under the earth. If it didn't, how could it throw up its flood of light in the east? 13th century. And salt water climbs with such marvelous swiftness to the sky. If it didn't, how would the cabbages be fed with rain? Tears going to Egypt. Didn't he learn how to understand dreams and give away grain, saving the entire basin from famine? And you, if you can't leave your country, you could go into yourself and become a ruby mine open to the gifts of the sun. You could travel from your manhood into the inner man, or from your womanhood into the inner woman. By a journey of that sort, earth became a place where you can find gold. So leave your complaints and self-pity and internalized death energy. Don't you realize how many sweet fruits have already escaped out of the sourness into sweetness? You know every fruit grows handsome in the light of the sun. So think about seeing your life with appreciation, all of it, good, bad, and ugly. Seeing all of it with appreciation as often as possible. And those pieces that are particularly gnarly, see if you can get enough perspective on them to even see them with gratitude. Because then you're in your own body and you're in charge of your life. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I'm going to roll into the affirmative prayer that we do this time of the service. And praying affirmatively means we're claiming the good. And if we've got some stories that we need to clear, we can do that. We're allowed. It's appropriate. But affirmative prayer is about claiming the good. So if I've said something useful to you, hold it in your mind while I speak the words. I celebrate this one life. I know it is God. I know it lives as me and as each beloved here. I know that it is moved and powered by love. It expresses as beauty and truth and order and peace and harmony. It shows up as great goodness. It shows up as expansion. It shows up as acceptance. It shows up as appreciation. It shows up as a feeling of belonging, security, peace, and ease. I know this truth. I know this experience for me and for all beings. I know that each one already lives enfolded in the goodness of God, in that space of divine harmony, in that space of love. And I know this as the truth for all beings. I know this is the truth for all experiences. All of this is in God. And all of it is available to my eyes to see when I choose to see with those God eyes that are part of my being and part of the being of all. And I know this isn't a chore or a task or a battle. It's a gift already given. And it's up to me to receive it. And it's up to each one to receive this goodness, this grace, and to live from that. Because living in that space is not only the capital T truth, it is life itself. So I rest in that. I allow it, I receive it, and I let it be. And so it is.